Hey, RetconRaider here. Today I thought we'd return to my roots and take a quick look at a promising indie title that's currently on Kickstarter. Today, I thought we'd talk about Bevontule, Altar of Roots, by Multithreaded Games. So, what is Bevontule? Well, it's a hybrid turn-based tactical JRPG inspired by a variety of different RPG subgenres, all set in an original high fantasy world. Bevontule draws inspiration from many sources, including both Western and Japanese RPGs, and features a heavy focus on a gridless tactical combat system. Bevontule takes place in Anuchit, a land ravaged by a threat known as the Kelvari. The Kelvari is a massive network of semi-sentient roots which have grown over half the continent, leaving many northern and western regions desolate and uninhabitable. Wherever the Kelvari goes, it consumes minerals and assimilates local wildlife, creating aggressive hybrid creatures known as root souls. Entire advanced civilizations, such as the southern nation of Lovasić, have crumbled as their people scatter in the face of what is essentially an extinction-level event. Although the Kelvari poses a threat to all life on the continent, disparate factions continue to struggle for control over what little remains. The arboreal kingdom of Auvain, once intent on preventing the advance of the Kelvari, has now turned its massive armies towards expanding their borders. Their efforts are opposed by the nation of Valiquine, which uses a vast network of spies to keep tabs on any and all potential threats. Other nations, having never faced the Kelvari directly, have proven unwilling to assist in the war against it, leading to ever-increasing political tensions. Meanwhile, smaller factions seek to take advantage of the constant strife. The Bone Dancers, driven mad by centuries of ceaseless war against the Kelvari, have instead turned towards worshipping it through ritual sacrifice. The Cullstone Syndicate instead used the threat posed by the Kelvari to turn a profit, smuggling illegal wares all throughout the continent. Even the native Anikians, displaced by humanity generations ago, are quietly lurking in the shadows, just waiting for a chance to retake their ancestral lands. The player takes on the role of a mysterious newcomer named Bodum. Claiming to be from a city known as Bevontule, which has somehow survived the Kelvari infestation to the north, Bodum was part of a strike force sent out in search of resources. The game begins shortly after Bodum's ship is sabotaged, and he is left stranded in Valiquine. He is soon joined by two companions, Appolith and Morok. Appolith is an elite officer of the Valenquinian military, tasked with destroying the Cullstone Syndicate that is running rampant in the western regions of Anuchit. Morok is a brilliant and opportunistic alchemist who was recruited by Appolith due to his ongoing rivalry with the Syndicate. The two rescue Bodum but demand proof of his outlandish claims, and the story unfolds from there. Although we don't know many of the details just yet, we do know that the game will include a heavy focus on both exploration and narrative. The player will have to gather resources, recruit allies, and face off against the threats posed by both the Kingdom of Auvain as well as the Kelvari itself. From a gameplay standpoint, Bevontule draws heavy inspiration from the JRPG subgenre. The player will travel across a large world map, encountering enemies and exploring smaller sublocations, such as dungeons, towns, and other points of interest. Sublocation maps appear to be quite large, with an assortment of enemies to fight, loot to claim, and quests to complete. Although the developers have stressed the importance of the lore and narrative, a large part of the game's focus revolves around the turn-based tactical combat system. Enemy encounters are represented on the map, allowing the player a chance to physically avoid confrontation, but once an enemy has made contact with the player's party, a tactical battle will begin. These tactical battles take place on a gridless battlefield, with movement and attack ranges being represented by circular markers around the combatants. Combat initiative is determined by each combatant's speed attribute, and each combatant can take one movement action and one standard action before their turn is over. Movement and standard actions can be taken in any order, though certain special skills may end a combatant's turn immediately. Standard actions can be used to make attacks, use items, or activate special skills. All of these actions have a limited range, and some actions are modified based on factors such as adjacency or facing. This means that the player will need to carefully choose their positions on the battlefield, especially when using items or skills that can strike multiple targets at a time. This also means that the player can often avoid enemy attacks by simply predicting where they're going to be and then moving out of the way ahead of time. Most actions will be resolved immediately, with the notable exception of certain special skills. Many special skills require extra time to activate, with the timeline on the right side of the screen displaying when a character's skill will resolve. If the player can arrange their actions in a way that causes multiple skills to resolve in a row, it will inflict increasing amounts of bonus damage as each subsequent skill is resolved. This all combines into a relatively deep tactical combat system. Early battles are fairly straightforward, often devolving into simple slugfests, but later battles become far more involved as the player carefully arranges powerful skill chains and actively avoids enemy attacks. Each time a character survives a battle, they gain both experience points and ability points. Experience points count towards increasing a character's overall level, with each level granting flat bonuses to several of the attributes that define that character's role in combat. This includes several generic attributes, such as strength, intellect, and speed, as well as the technique attribute, which has a unique effect on each character. For example, Apolith is presented as a heavily armored warrior, and his level-ups often focus on granting him strength and resistance over most other attributes. Morok, on the other hand, is presented as a greedy alchemist, and his level-ups instead focus on granting him intellect and wisdom. They both have a technique attribute, but in Apolith's case, this determines his chance to block physical attacks, while in Morok's case, it instead determines his chance to successfully steal items. Each character possesses a unique skill tree consisting of both active and passive skills. The player unlocks new skills using the ability points they accrue in battle, but the number of skills that they can actively equip at once is instead determined by their overall character level. Skills can also be upgraded by spending additional ability points, enhancing or even completely altering the way those skills work in combat. Although character roles are predefined, each character's skill tree is intended to give them some degree of flexibility. Bodum, for example, begins the game as a lightly armored rogue, with a heavy focus on mobility and damage at the cost of physical durability. As he gains experience points and unlocks new skills, the player can choose to slowly change his focus in combat, potentially turning him into a frontline fighter or a long-range mage. The player will generally control 3 characters at a time, and the current demo, which takes place at a very early point in the game, only includes Apolith, Bodum, and Morok. The developers are planning on including at least 2 more recruitable characters in the final game, including an archer named Linnell and what appears to be a root-bound named Elvali. The player will also have some degree of customization with the game's planned equipment system. Although this system does appear to be a bit bare bones, it allows the player to equip his characters with an assortment of basic weapons, armor, and accessories to further fine-tune their attributes and combat abilities. The game will also feature a basic crafting system, which will allow the player to gather crafting ingredients and then use them to craft or upgrade various items. From a presentation standpoint, the game actually looks and sounds quite nice. Although it's obviously not a AAA title, the developers have done quite well given what appears to be a very limited development budget. The visuals are lush and colorful, with both the world and submaps being presented as full 3D environments. The music does a good job of providing additional atmosphere, but without becoming too distracting or overwhelming. Although it's not slated for release until March of 2019, the developers have already released a pre-alpha demo. This showcases several of the game's core mechanics, while also giving the player a taste of the game's early storyline. While this obviously isn't representative of the final product, it does at least give us a good general idea of what the developers have planned. Of course, that's not to say the game doesn't have any problems. Judging from the current demo, combat can get a bit tedious, especially when the player is given quests that revolve around grinding certain types of enemies or resources. The proposed equipment system is also very basic, with items generally following a simple linear progression. Mouse navigation can sometimes be clunky, the user interface currently seems to favor the use of a controller, and the game currently lacks convenience features such as a quest journal or tooltips. Despite this, the game does show quite a bit of promise. I spent several hours thoroughly playing through the current pre-alpha demo, and overall, I found it to be a rather enjoyable experience. There are certainly areas that could stand to be improved, but it's important to remember that the demo, despite how good it looks, is still just a pre-alpha. The game is still at a very early stage of development, and the developers are actively seeking feedback to help improve the final product. The developers at Multithreaded Games are currently running a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, with a rather modest goal of just $50,000 US. Tiers range from a basic $20 package and up, with higher tiers promising the usual assortment of digital and physical goods. If you think that Bevontule looks like the sort of game you might enjoy, then I encourage you to go check it out. You can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, the crowdfunding campaign over on Kickstarter, or by downloading the pre-alpha demo on Steam. As always, links are in the description.